everyone. For this week's discussion post, I'll be talking about communities and community practices that we learned from this week's readings. I'll define the terms, explain how it could connect to social work, and I'll share my own professional and personal reflections. So, a community is a number of people who have something in common with one another that connects them in some way that distinguishes them from others. So, these ideas come from chapter 9, communities in the macro social environment, and chapter 10, community empowerment and geographic community assessment. So, communities can be both geographical or non geographical. So, when they're non geographical, they're tied by things like identity, interests, profession, spirituality, or sexual orientation. Community practice treats the community itself as both the means and the focus of social work, aiming for a neighborhood and system level change that centers power, social justice, and collective action. There are several ways to study communities. Some focus on how systems work, looking at the boundaries and like the inputs of the communities. Others look at how people and their environment interact. And some examine how belonging and social norms shape behavior. Other approaches ask what roles a community serves, who controls resources and power, and how people create meaning in everyday life, and how communities can use their strengths to act together. How we assess a community matters. A problem focused approach looks for needs and gaps. An assets based approach looks for what people, groups, and places already do well and builds upon those strengths. Useful methods include looking at statistics, holding public meetings, interviewing knowledgeable people who are local to the community, and using structured group techniques to gather residents' ideas. In social work, I believe that we must identify who holds those resources and who makes decisions before starting an intervention. We also have to look for natural helpers of the community and local services, everyday people and groups who are already supporting others, because they can make a big difference in improving people's lives. So we must be aware of those things. Rural and urban community work feel different because each setting brings its own challenges, strengths, and ways of getting things done. In rural areas, social workers wear many hats because services are spread out. You have to rely on informal networks, coordinate closely with other agencies, and you have to be careful about boundaries since you may often know people in multiple roles. Whereas in cities, the work is more about navigating specialized services and complex systems while also confronting bigger gaps in order to help like tougher problems like poverty and housing instability. Both settings demand flexibility, cultural sensitivity, and a clear sense of who holds power and resources within the community. For my professional practice, this means I'm going to begin by identifying community strengths and mapping who holds power before designing interventions. I'll also use mixed methods like data and resident input to be ready to take on different roles. It's really going to be dependent on what the community needs. I'm also going to commit to being culturally informed. I'll use strength based engagement in order to avoid quick fixes that ignore the local context of the community. These readings this week really hit home for me because I naturally lean toward collaboration, but they reminded me that sometimes you have to lean into conflict strategically when power imbalances are blocking fairness. I really did come away energized by the idea of starting with community strengths and more determined to build long term partnerships instead of just swooping in with quick fixes that are just band aids to problems. I believe it's a good reminder to stay humble, listen first, and to resist the urge to play the savior, as many people want to do. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to listening to your videos this week. Bye.